everybody. This is Kelly from Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm here with my co-host, Sophie. Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Kelly.
And depending on where you're listening to this, either the next two people are our guests or we're their guests. So we have two people from the End Times Pep Talk.
I'm Megan, the gay one.
And I'm Rebecca, the Jew one.
And that makes Kelly the knitting one.
And Sophie, the Christian one.
So weird.
Longtime listeners of End Times Pep Talk may notice we are missing someone today. Unfortunately, it was impossible to get 5 people's schedules to all sync up during the Christmas to New Year's week, but hopefully we'll get Smitha's voice in here at some point.
Kelly just said it's impossible to get 5 women to sync up. And I thought, yes, it is, but no.
But actually,
Sorry.
no. If we were all in the same place, we would all be really crabby right now. Smitha's got her hands on somebody's artery right now, preventing them from bleeding death or something. So she's
Hopefully.
doing important stuff.
All right, so we've decided to join forces this week for a big, mega 2017 in review sort of episode.
Extravaganza.
So we're just going to dive in and talk about the best and the worst of 2017 and see what we think 2018 might hold. So in my show notes, I've titled the first segment, The Moments of 2017 Where It Didn't Feel Like the World Was About to End. Were there such moments?
No. Moving on.
Probably. I could count them on one hand, probably.
All right, well, first segment done. So let's reframe that a little bit and talk about what were the moments during 2017 that we actually found ourselves slightly enjoying and not totally worrying or hopeful about the direction of where things could go. Feels like we could start in January with the Women's March.
The Women's March is where everybody seems to be starting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how did you guys commemorate that day? Did you go to marches where you are?
I did. I went in Chicago with 500 million of my closest friends, along with my then 5-year-old, and we had a lot of fun. It was a really upbeat, exciting time. We knew it was, I knew it was going to be big anyway, but we really knew it was going to be big when we got on the train from our neighborhood, went downtown, and they had closed down the downtown train stop because it was so crowded and there were so many people. So they made us get off like a stop early and walk the rest of the way. And there were just a sea of people.
How many people ended up being at the Chicago one?
You're going to ask me for stats?
Just
A lot.
500 million.
My brother was there with his 5-year-old and my sister-in-law, and I remember just like being amazed that you guys had such great weather and that it was like what, 250,000 or something in Chicago. It was huge.
I had no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah,
big.
it was really, really big. In fact, when we were leaving, we didn't even get like the whole way the march was supposed to go. We had a couple little kids with us, and so we just sort of ditched at some point.
It's your kids.
We ditched the kids. We ditched the march.
That was the right answer. Just checking.
Because you couldn't move. There were so many people. And on the bus on the way home was the first time we were able to get internet reception because there'd been so many people downtown that you couldn't even get internet. And so we looked on the phone and it said, Chicago March canceled because there's so many people. There's safety concerns. And we're like, we were just marching. But there were so many people that
Fake news.
they couldn't even tell us that it had been canceled. So it was pretty great. And Sophie, you went to the Madison March, right?
I did, and that one was really amazing. I actually think it was close to 200,000, at least 100,000 were there, which is incredible for Madison. Madison is not like a huge place, and the entire Capitol Square was just filled. There are pictures of the square where every single available space where people could be, there were people. I've never seen so many people in one place. And we went to the march. I went with my husband and our son, who was 10 months old at the time. And
Wow.
I had a sign that my office mate had handwritten for me. She's a designer. She does like cool things with design. And so she had designed this sign that said, a mother by choice and for choice.
Nice.
and my son had a little sign that just said "Love Trump's Hate" in his stroller. And we went downtown, and the first notice that I had that it was going to be big was that I suddenly saw these people, a few of them wearing pussy hats, but everybody with signs. And I was like, wait, that's a lot more people than I thought were going to be here. And we hadn't even gotten to the location where the march started. They actually had a problem with the march because they had intended to march down State Street to the Capitol building. And instead, there were so many people that once they got to the Capitol building, they didn't have any room to like move forward for more people to come down State Street. So the march took like 2 hours instead of like the 30 minutes that they thought it was going to take, because they couldn't fit all the people into the square. And this is the state capitol. So it was enormous and loud and incredible and heartening. And I was really glad my son got to see it. My grandparents were civil rights workers in the 50s and 60s in the South. And they always would tell these incredible stories of taking my mother and her sister to these marches and seeing the KKK there and like standing up in their hoods and marching.
You guys got to see Scott Walker.
No, he wouldn't come out. We yelled at his office, but he wouldn't come out. And so but I really liked that I got to sort of share that moment with my son in the same way that my grandparents got to, teach my mother and her sister about justice in that way.
Oh, that's great.
We were all in different cities.
Yeah, because you were here in Portland.
I was in Portland. You were in DC.
I was in DC.
And I kind of, after the night of the election, I went into autopilot mode, which I have talked about before on our other podcast. But so I had stayed away from politics until I figured out what I was going to do about what was happening. But we kind of my wife and I had kind of heard like rumblings of the Women's March, but I don't think we made the decision to go until like the day before. And then we had no idea kind of what it was. We weren't part of any like the controversy. We didn't like hear anything about that. And so we wake up, and I was the only one here on the West Coast. So we are 3 hours behind the East Coast marches. So we woke up to like Berlin and, Paris, and then we saw New York City. And so by the time we left our house, we're like, oh shit, like this is a big deal. Like there's no way we can't go. And we were seeing Denver and, Chicago, and going there. It was the same kind of insanity. It was the largest protest in Portland history.
100,000?
At least 100,000.
And Portland's not a big city. It's less than a million.
It's that's 1/7 of our population showed up to that march.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And the weather was so shitty.
It was terrible.
It was terrible.
Yeah. And Portlanders don't carry umbrellas. Which we definitely should have that day. Kathy and I had to like walk around downtown, and it was like literally the cops were in pink hats, like they were doing like I can't say the P word, the other P word. So I'll say fuck all day long, just not that word. And it was just like everyone, people in stores, people who were, the downtown area, people who are working in shops had stairs, people were like handing out free food. It was just Portland's crazy, nice and welcoming, but that was just like an overabundance of like amazingness. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I went to DC. When I heard about it, I don't know, and whenever it first started bubbling up in December, I guess I was like, I have to go, because I was such a wreck and I was such a basket case that I needed something to work towards and to focus on. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine here in Portland was like, hey, I have a friend in Virginia who said we can sleep in her basement. Who's in? And so 2 other friends said, yeah. And we bought tickets on a red eye on Spirit Airlines, which is like the worst possible thing you could ever do. And then I spent like the entire month of December just making signs, because I'm a designer and an artist. And so I was just hand painting all these signs that said Big Pussy is watching and the female body has ways to shut this whole thing down. I just couldn't stop making signs. And then, I gave them to my friends and they were like, oh, great, instant signs. So we went in a day or two before we flew in, and both flights across country were full of pussy hats, and all the airports were full of pussy hats. We saw like 1 MAGA hat for every 10 pink hats. And we landed the morning of the inauguration, and we were like, we can't go anywhere near this. It's just too depressing. So we went to Alexandria, which is across the river from DC, and it was just like full of women there for the march. It was so amazing. And like the solidarity everywhere you went, people were just like hugging and taking selfies and sharing stories and comparing notes, and people were coming from all over the country. It was so incredible. Like, was the first time I felt hope, since November. And I was like, okay, I'm not alone. Like, this is, it's going to be all right.
Like, everyone thinks this is crazy.
Yes.
Like, we've all been watching the shit show, and everyone agrees it's the shit show, and we're going to get together and do something.
Yeah, it was
it was really heartening.
And then the next morning, we were going to take the metro into the city, and the friend who was letting us sleep in her basement was like, no, I'll drive you guys in. So she dropped us off like a block from the march, and we get to the mall. We were there a little early, and they have all these stations set up all along the mall with these giant Megatron screens and stages and stuff. And so we got pretty close, and we saw like the Samantha Bee bus, like we saw the buses from all the late night shows there and everything. And then it just like within like an hour, it just filled up solid. Like you could not move. There really was no march because it was so packed, the entire route. Yeah. And it was just happiness and solidarity, and like the signs were hilarious, and the people were funny and saying great things, and the t-shirts, and people had their kids, and the weather was great. Like I was prepared for like the most horrible freezing cold weather, and that was great. I mean, everything was just in our favor. And then the speakers were incredible, and we were right by a screen, and we could see, because I know a lot of the screens and the audio weren't working, but where we were, we could see everything. And like in Chicago, like nobody had any service. So, everybody's cell phones went down. We had no idea what was going on anywhere else. We were there all day. And then by the end, we did get to march a little bit, and we marched over to the White House, and everybody was leaving their signs. There's like a fence around the White House now. You can't get that close to it at that park that's by the White House. And people were leaving their signs all around the entire White House. It was just like a wall of signs. It was such a beautiful thing. It was incredible. And then we started hearing these rumors like, there are 1 million people here. The DC police say 1.2 million. And, that number got revised down to about 500,000, I think. But in 1989, I went to the March for Women's Lives in DC, and that was 500,000. That was the official number then. And the Women's March was way bigger. Like, it doesn't even compare. Like, the march in 89, you could move. There was an actual march. There was space. This was just wall-to-wall people everywhere you went. I know for sure it was more than 500,000 people. But anyway, so we went to a bar afterwards, and then everybody started, their phones started working, and CNN was on in the bar. And when we started seeing what had happened around the world, it was I just broke down in tears. It was just so gratifying and amazing. And my husband went here in Portland with my daughter, who was 11 at the time, and he was like 100,000 people in Portland, and my brother was in Chicago, like 500,000 people in Chicago or whatever it was, and LA, 500,000 people. I mean, we all know the story. I don't know why I'm going on and on.
Yeah, sure.
Also, I just want to give a shout out to cities where there were marches that weren't as large, like little small towns, like where my parents went. I think they went to Grove City, Pennsylvania, which if anybody knows about Grove City, Pennsylvania, it is not a bastion of liberal thinking. And there were 2,000 people there at that march, and there were a lot more people than they expected to show up there. So also you out in those small towns with those marches that had a couple hundred people, good for you. That was awesome too.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the other thing. Like when I saw like Boise, Idaho,
Fairfax, Alaska.
Yeah, I mean it's like
the boat in Antarctica.
Yeah, people just coming out of the woodwork everywhere. Yeah. Grants Pass, Oregon.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of those marches didn't even get organized until very late. I was on the periphery of the planning committee for the Chicago Women's March, and they got started right away, and they had a date and a time and a Facebook page and everything. And on the Women's March, official website, I kept going to see if there was a march near my parents that my mom could go to. And the Cleveland March didn't even show up until a week ahead of time. And I was like, oh, look, there's a Cleveland March. So, some of these things I think got pulled together at literally the last minute.
And some of them were just people who were like, hey, we should have a march here in this town. Why don't we just apply for the permits and just go, and everybody will just show up?
Well, and in the smaller towns, it probably doesn't take quite as much planning. For 500,000, 250,000 people, you need a lot of planning to make that happen.
You're going to need a permit for that.
Yeah, you're going to need some porta potties.
Yeah.
Some cops on standby. You need some planning, but.
Yeah. And Portland's was mired in liberal infighting controversy.
Oh, of course,
that almost derailed the whole thing. And now, a year later, all these cities are doing 1-year anniversary marches, and Portland isn't, I think, for the same reasons. And it's so frustrating. But anyway, that's
just a little local politics in America.
Yes, there